Darksiders is a lot of things to a lot of people. It is compared with the likes of The Legend of Zelda, God of War, and even Diablo. It's also become a franchise fully available on handhelds thanks to the Nintendo Switch. After all, we already got 1, 2, and Genesis, so we knew the final title wasn't far behind. Here is my review of Darksiders 3 for the Nintendo Switch. To give you a bit of background, Darksiders takes place in a mythos where angels, demons, and humans exist in different worlds. There is also a high entity called the Charred Council and 4 beings of a race called Nephilim that have become known as the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Like with Darksiders 2, 3 takes place in a time slot between the intro and main scenario of Darksiders 1. During War's 100-year imprisonment, the Apocalypse is taking place on Earth, and the Horseman known as Fury is summoned by the Charred Council to go to Earth and capture the 7 deadly sins. Overall, I would call this game's plot good. There are some familiar faces, and Fury goes through good development as a character. When it comes to gameplay, Darksiders 3 is a 3D action game with lots of platforming, fast-paced combat, and puzzle solving. To start things off, the Nintendo Switch version has the base game and DLC expansions for the Crucible and Keepers of the Void. Now, the overall gameplay formula was changed for Darksiders 3. You still have large areas to trek through and explore, puzzles to solve with throwing objects, and getting new abilities to conquer the puzzles of future dungeons. But how you go about it is a bit different. The first 2 games felt like a bit of a combo between God of War's combat style and Zelda's dungeon and puzzles. Add some Dark Souls to that combination and you've got Darksiders 3. We don't really have that brutal retry until you absolutely master the boss difficulty, but a lot of systems are very similar. To give some examples, you get souls from enemies, objects, and items that are used for currency as well as experience. You find merchant checkpoints that serve not only as a shop to buy or spend souls on levels, but fast travel, respawning, and autosave. Clunky dodge mechanics, having to stand still while you use a healing item, enemies that hide behind boxes to surprise you. You even lose your souls upon death and have to go and reclaim them. But this game is a bit more forgiving as those souls won't go poof if you die on the way there. But getting to main game progression, Darksiders 3 uses an interconnected map of dungeons and hub areas between. Many directions lead to different areas, some of which you can access in whatever order you please. Many of the dungeons do require abilities to open doorways, but a few of them allow you to pick an order. Or you can be like me and just miss the entrance to the Sloth dungeon only to go back later with a massively overpowered Fury. The dungeons have the same Darksiders format as before. Big rooms, platforming, and puzzle solving, though the latter is done with abilities and forms rather than tools. Each boss fight gives Fury a transformation and new way to interact with environments, like the Flame Hollow's Super Jump or the Storm Hollow's Glide. These abilities are used for most of the puzzle solving, though you will occasionally get the classic Darksiders throwing puzzle. You've also got a lot of enemies to fight. The combat here is hack and slash with button combinations, a dash mechanic to use counterattacks, and items you can use in real time. There are a lot of different button combinations for each weapon, giving you options from just attacking enemies to doing grabs, throws, and big AoE spins. Each of the sub-weapons that come with the hollow forms also have their own button combinations, giving you a lot of different ways to keep the flow of combat going. And honestly, there's a lot of fun to be had here. It isn't as fast-paced as Darksiders 2, but everything is flashy and has weight to it. There's a nice flow to it, and every hit I put in felt really good. Before moving on, let us address the Soul's inspiration part of the combat system. The whole stand still to heal thing isn't actually a requirement. Not long after Darksiders 3's initial release on other platforms, a classic mode was added as a control setup. This doesn't really change what the buttons do, but it gives you a much larger dodge window, and you can use items while you're moving instead of standing still. And then there's the difficulty. When I started this game, it felt like a Dark Souls game from how much damage enemies did to me and just the overall feel. But I think it might have given me that feeling from all of the other parts of gameplay that took inspiration from that franchise. It's pretty difficult at first, with mobs doing high damage and bosses almost requiring perfect dodges and counters. But once I got to dungeons 3 and 4 and my points got high enough, most of that difficulty went away. The game's leveling system has you spending souls to get attribute points to allocate to health or damage. These points give you a pretty substantial boost, not even getting into the higher numbers you can get from upgrades. This numbers game is reminiscent of RPGs and can make Fury an unstoppable killing machine. I was very careful around everything early on, but once my points got high enough, I didn't even bother trying to dodge most of the normal mobs. I was just able to run up to them and force my way through by button mashing. Now there is skill involved in this game, especially when it comes to bosses, but nowhere near what you'd expect from a game inspired by From Software. That brings us to content and length. This is a decently long adventure, with the main story taking around 18 to 20 hours to complete. Now there is no post-game in Darksiders fashion, but you can extend that time a little bit by searching for the optional bosses and doing the DLC. Next up is presentation. Overall, the game looks pretty good. There are some rooms that take a bit of extra time to load textures, but it looks good, especially in handheld mode. But performance is different. A bit smaller, but this version has a little bit of input lag in docked mode specifically, as well as occasional model clashing bugs. The most frequent of those bugs that I saw were getting stuck on the ground while swimming and a conveyor belt puzzle not properly tossing large stones. The main two issues with performance, however, are loading and frame rate. There are many areas that you're supposed to have seamless transitions into, but the game freezes up and has you wait while it loads the rest of the area. Once I'd gotten to the cathedral, it did this in almost every new place I went. Then we get to frame rate. For many areas, especially towards the beginning, we get a nice 30 FPS with frame dips here and there. But as you all pointed out during my stream of Darksiders 3, the further you get, the worse the frame rate gets. The second half of the game has a ton of areas that have almost constant frame dips that easily go down into the low 20s. I still managed to get through the entire game, but some of the dungeons are pretty rough. Now we can go into battery life. On the original model, Darksiders 3 gets a battery range of 1 hour and 54 minutes up to 2 hours and 41. On the Nintendo Switch Lite, it gets a range of 3 hours to 3 hours and 48. The Red Boxer V2 gets a range of 3 hours and 50 up to 4 hours and 50. And the OLED model gets a range of 4 hours and 28 to 4 hours and 52. In conclusion, Darksiders 3 is a fun action-adventure that throws what made the previous games fun with a fair bit of Dark Souls. Now on the downside, there are a lot of optimization problems, from frame rate issues to the game freezing when loading in new areas. It's worth trekking through if you're a fan of the franchise, but be wary of those performance issues. Reviews to Go rates Darksiders 3 for the Nintendo Switch a 6 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.